I'm just here to say a word of welcome, and then I'll turn it over to Jonathan, and he'll get you guys all started. Make sure everybody gets some Chipotle, and Jonathan, take it away.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Casey. Good evening. Good evening. Good nothing. All right. Nice to see you all. Welcome. Glad you're here. There's an agenda on the table there, or if you need a copy here, please help yourself. Thank you to the city for providing the hosting us here at Fire Medical and for providing food. So if you are watching on Zoom and hungry, please come and partake. There's plenty to eat here. So I'm glad to have you all here. We have a lot to cover tonight. This is a really important meeting for the work group and a point of transition in our work. And so I want to just quickly orient you to the agenda and the work at hand, and then we'll dive right into it. This meeting is being broadcast on Zoom. And so for anyone remote who wishes to observe, they're able to click on the link on the agenda on the city website, and that will lead you here. And then this will be recorded and posted on the portal after the meeting is over as well. So thank you all for being here. Let me just quickly introduce you to the agenda and walk through our game plan. So we have four main items tonight. We'll just do some quick logistics under item number 1 under welcome and updates, and talk a little bit about discussion notes from our previous work session and all prior sessions. And then I want to talk about the community engagement portal. And then we're going to do a quick debrief of the community conversation number 1. I want to give you an update on the raw notes that we've collected from that, and talk about the theming process that we'll take going forward. And then spend a little bit of time talking about community conversation number 2 that will be coming up on July 31st. The next major item on the agenda, which will occupy the majority of our time this evening, is related to the complaint process and the mapping of that. And so we're going to have a presentation on the current complaint process. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions on that so that we understand it best we can. And then we're going to begin a mapping process with the idea of, first of all, documenting the current process and then identifying potential areas for improvement, and then informing your later conversations over the next few weeks about recommendations for improvements on the process. And then we will end agenda item number 4. We'll end with discussion of next steps and future meetings. We have a number of homework pieces coming out of this, so I'll speak more to that, but this is a pivotal time for the work session where we're going to begin to pivot from the community conversation data that we're going to be analyzing over the next few weeks, and then also diving into some resource documents to inform our work, begin looking at some best practices, and informing how you begin to weigh in with one another on whatever recommendations you plan to put forward. We're going to talk just briefly about a quick update for the city commission at tomorrow evening's commission meeting, and then say a few more things about the upcoming community conversation and outreach for that. And then I want to note that our next work session meetings will be August 14th, August 21st, and August 28th. And I have one other potential date to throw your way based on tonight's discussion that I might want to add to the mix if we need it and if you all are available for that. So that's the game plan. You have pens on your table so you can take notes throughout. And as we get into the complaint process presentation, I'll prompt you to jot down some questions and take notes throughout so that we can be as efficient with our time and as thorough as we can be with our work. Does anybody have any questions on the agenda before we get started? All right, good. Thank you for being here. All right, so let me just say a few things Meeting logistics, we're still scheduled to meet on Mondays from 6 to 8. And the community engagement portal on the city's website is the hub and host for our discussion notes from prior meetings. So I have draft versions of those that that you can access on that, and that the city's in the process of uploading for all of our prior meetings, including the June 26th discussion notes. And I just want to give you a quick orientation on the community engagement portal, so you can see what is available for to access on that. We are using the city's portal as our venue for accessing any documents that you all create, any documents that you review, anything that we produce together, so that the community has access to everything that you have access to. And we can also just direct everyone's attention to one location. So I just want to quickly show you a couple of resources that we have for the city's purposes to support this work group. So when you go to the city's main website, you'll see at the very top a what do you call it? A button, if you will, that says Community Police Oversight Work Group. This is our portal. And as you scroll down, this has all relevant documents. The city communications put out some information about upcoming community conversations. And then you will see all past meetings. And so this is being populated now with the agenda, the meeting recording. As those are complete, they'll be linked here. And then this will be an active link for the discussion notes for everything that we generate at each of our meetings. So that will be a place that you can go back and have access to all those notes. Then it's structured as a frequently asked questions site. And so this is to help the community and ourselves orient ourselves to the work. So what is the Community Police Oversight Work Group? There's some background information for your reference here. There is a section here with key documents. And so we will be looking at each of these, and I'll be tasking you with reviewing each of these in advance of our next work session. Our resolution and the work group charter that the city commission passed to create the work group, the ordinance that was passed to originally create the CPRB. And then I also want to call your attention to the Citygate report, which is the Police Department Comprehensive Management Study. And that is the report that had a lengthy set of recommendations, including that in order to address challenges related to the CPRB, the Citygate study recommended the creation of this work group to do a deep dive specifically to look at the CPRB and the complaint process as part of that. So if you've not read that study or looked at it recently, I want you to also access that. And as you're looking at that, not only are there specific recommendations specific to CPRB and the complaint process, but in totality, it'll give you a broader sense of what the study's recommendations are and might inform some of your thinking or perhaps your approach on recommendations. But it's an important source document for what we do. This will also be the location for any other additional documents that you feel would be of value in your research as a work group to begin to craft your recommendations. So that can be source documents. A couple of the former CPRB members or current members have recommended a couple of documents from NACOL, which we'll say more about a little bit later on. And any other documents that speak to challenges, pros and cons, best practices related to community police oversight, advisory, and or review. And so this will be where we house those documents. And we'll communicate when those are available so that you'll have the ability to read through all those. And to the extent to which it's helpful to reference back to those, this essentially functions as our packet, if you will, for our work going forward. So the other thing I would just ask is if you have documents from either your own research or that others have made you acquainted with that you think would be of value to inform our deliberations, please let me know that so that we can house those here under the key reference documents. Last couple of things that I'll share and then see if you have any questions. How can I get involved? So there's a drop down for the community that's interested in the work of the work group. These are just various ways that the community can participate and also be apprised of our progress, and then also look for potential ways to participate once you've produced your recommendations. How will my input be used by the work group? So one of the questions is, as we engage the public on community conversations, for example, what do we do with that data? How does that inform your deliberations as you build out your recommendations? And there's a link to the questionnaire that remains active so that anyone who either doesn't attend in person or isn't able or elects not to, but also wishes to contribute, they have an opportunity here. This is the information about all of our future meetings and locations under when and where does the work group meet. So these are all public meetings and we encourage the public to attend. And then there's a description in here. What is the difference between the work group and the CPRB? And so just to restate, this group that's meeting currently is not the CPRB. The Community Police Review Board is a separate entity. 3 of the members of this work group also serve in an official capacity on the CPRB, and the City Commission has suspended those meetings until the conclusion of our work here. So one of the main distinctions that the CPRB is responsible for is fielding complaints and referring those on to the police department, which we'll talk about more during our presentation this evening. But we are not charged with that responsibility here as a work group. So that this is just some information to explain those distinctions. Link here in terms of who serves on the work group. And this points out that the representation on this group, and then a link to the city's page for the work group, so you have contact information there. And then lastly, if you have contact information specific to the work group or the process, my contact information is there, as well as Casey Tooman in the city manager's office. So that's our portal. So any information that we generate or reference needs to ultimately end up here. So please alert me to what you need to see on here if you have questions, and I can relay that to Casey, and then she makes it happen through city staff. So I appreciate all the work that the staff's done to build this out for us, and it's a great resource on the city's website for any kind of community engagement. So I appreciate that we have our place for it. So you may have any questions on the portal? Yes.
Yeah, none of the work that we've done to date has ended up on the portal, despite, I think, some statements that it was going to get there.
Yes.
Such as all the flip charts we've done, and I guess most important to me, and I'm probably the only one who missed that last meeting for public comment, but I was really hoping to look at the raw data on the public comment from the last meeting, and
Yes.
it was represented that it was going to be there last Thursday, and then I didn't hear from anyone, and then today it was supposed to be on, and it's still not there. So I guess I'm a little worried that stuff isn't making it on there in a timely manner so that we can use it and refresh our recollections. And I think that's going to be even more important as documents are needed to be put on there for all of us to review. And so I'm wondering, is there a plan to make it happen a little quicker?
Yes, so everything that we generate, will end up under each date as it's generated. And now that this is built out, it's just a matter of me taking it and then getting it to city staff. So I know better what I need to be doing on my end. And I will also share with you, we're about to get into the community notes conversation. We generated a few hundred, the community generated a few hundred responses through that, and it took way longer than I anticipated. So I'm going to share with you the raw, what we have up to this point, but that will be here within the next few days as its own link that we can reference that.
If a deadline is missed, where there's a representation that is going to show up on a date and it doesn't, it would be nice to get notice of that fact that it's not going to make it and get a new idea when it might make it on there.
Okay, that's very reasonable. So I'll do that for you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I
Yes.
had a call from somebody who had difficulty with, and I see there's a link for the for a Google poll or something,
Mhm.
as well as a link that is just labeled questionnaire. I don't know if those are exactly the same,
Yes.
but had difficulty, it wouldn't accept comments. And it was, is there a problem with that on an iPad, or is there a problem?
No, the questionnaire is entirely text-based, so it's built to only accept comments in text. So that might be and it's still live and functioning. So I'm happy to help troubleshoot if you want to direct them my way, but the link is active and is taking data. So has anybody else had any concerns about being able to access that?
I think one thing that can happen with Survey Monkey is sometimes there's a text limit. So maybe if somebody was leaving a really long comment, maybe.
Well, that could be, yeah,
So,
Could be.
but I just checked it and it didn't say the little 0-200, like sometimes.
Yeah.
Limited to 200 words or something. But it could have just been a setting you chose not to, somebody chose not to show that.
yeah, so that's very possible. So each text box has a 500 character limit currently. And the reason that was put in place is because these correlate to the exact discussion questions that we used during the community conversation. And so in order to have some degree of parity on how much someone conveys in that instance, that's why we put a limit on that. So that approximates to anywhere from like, I don't know, 50 to 100 words for each comment, something along those lines. And that in the in-person discussion was, we don't typically get longer responses than that. That was the rationale behind it. If you think that we should revisit that for community conversation 2, I'm very happy to do that. That's an easy adjustment if we want to entertain longer posts. I've also noted that on the top of the portal, there is a submit feedback. And this is part of the city's communication tool within the portal. I don't know if there's any text limits on that. We have received several very lengthy texts through that. And so that might be another way that people can submit longer entries. Okay, so if you haven't been on there yet, please check it out. And to Member Temple's insistence, we will get all discussion notes on there within the next couple of days so that you have access to that. And then if you have any questions, just email me and let me know if you don't see it there. Okay, so with that, questions? All right, so what I would like to do next is I want to turn your attention to the agenda item number 2 and the community conversation number 1 debrief. And so what I have been doing is I've collected all of the flip chart. Feedback that we received from each group. The community generated. I don't know that we have an official head count yet. They are still. I've not seen the video recording yet of the meeting, but that is in production, and so we should see that in the next couple of days. Did anybody happen to do an informal head count? We had 11 of our work group members of our 12 in attendance. We had, I think, between about 50 to 60 people total, including somewhere between 30 and 40 community members that participated in community conversation number 1. We've also received several dozen responses through our survey that come from, I believe, about somewhere around 13 to 15 respondents. So it hasn't been a huge number, but each respondent is generating 5 or 6 responses per person. So that data is also being collected, and that will be themed separately from the in-person so that you can keep the data accordingly. But if you and all of this has already been imaged, so we've got it here, but we use the method of community members writing their own ideas in their own words on Post-its and flip charts. And then this was captured in small group discussions throughout. At each table, we had 1 or 2 work group members that were participating in that discussion. And then we added a couple of additional questions, but I was very pleased with the degree of engagement and the amount of data that we generated, and eager to just get that in front of all of you to begin analyzing all of that. But before I go any further, I want to just give you the opportunity to debrief. And so to begin with, at your tables, I'd like for you to just weigh in and share, first of all, what you found most valuable, and then what you would recommend for improvements for community conversation number 2. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to just talk to your small groups, and then I want you to report out to the full group. So what you find most valuable, and any process improvements we need to talk about for community conversation number 2. Thank you.
Their primary. And their mind.
And that is. That was.
I feel like I got a lot out of that.
Have that.
It's kind of less engagement, right?
You can check. Come back.
I feel like that's a.
Yeah. One of the base groups, I think, but that was kind of the big thing.
Goes to the next step. And I don't think that's all right.
So.
That was what if. Yeah.
As a social worker, that he wants to get involved in that. That's what I used to talk about when you're going over
So. I would say. Yeah, and that, yeah, it's like, I would not have that same.
So.
But no, I use the.
You know what I'm saying?
But at the same time, like. Dramatic. Yeah. Whatever that moment is. When I go on a call, I see calls to
So that's where
I have the ability to search from whatever, but I can tell you when I'm on the call. Not like a computer, that's sort of your time. So yeah, I'm driving through. There's another plane. All over. Broad. I mean, I'm not working that, all those little things also. My job. I don't really work time. Right now. Right, I'm gonna ask you. Especially if my job. Basically, the automatics, right? And you can play like once you are. But also that's not what. Do, right? Of course, they're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, we will be already to that. You know, we're not gonna be meeting. Like, I'll say like the second or third shift. Like be more like. It's not gonna be up to this. Exactly. It's just gonna be like. Exactly. Like it's just not. It's just yeah. And one of the other things. I think. But any other thing.
So this should be. All. One thing which you did is get there and
If you're on patrol, I should like that. You're checked in on that one time. So that was research. I can pay my daily. And if I get a case, it says, you know, Greg did X, Y, Z, but that those are the. In fact, look into Greg. But when I want you that information, but when I'm going to say, yes, because when I'm going to, when we're going to call them. This batch will be important. Yeah. I guess it does with it is what's important.
Well, if I come to jail and get out, and just because somebody good exchange that there are such and such doesn't mean there are and so I have investigators and try to fill what they're saying. You know what? And I more than
And then so.
Currently investigating. That's like. And then still might be something where that's how my
$1 is like what you want.
building house to add area, but they were things I've seen on other ones about.
Everyone's like,
Yeah, they're gonna see what's going on. That's not. It's not. It's like
which
based
is
on.
a lovely dynamic.
You are clients.
Their main thing was
So when I check it.
they wanted me to ensure that was that the.
So. Was this?
How does it?
So, and I don't. Yes. And I also. There are two.
Raised an issue. That's one of the things. Yeah. That's the issue, not whether or not. We support.
So this, that's not what was.
Trying to figure out the system. Hey, sort of, company compliant, so they're necessarily.
And yeah, that is, but. Like if I have people, I'm in love with the company, the main coordinates that would come in. Like, if it goes to, you know, why are these things all high up and they make it, I would tell you that. So you guys have invested, like, it should happen, and I did, but also I try to say, tell me the type of time, like, I get people call and state will have that burned out, state and they call the signs. Look, I turned down and I'm going to, like, I'm just following and I see there's a time there. It's like, there and they're not costing. The finance are. I mean, with the questions, I mean, if I'm following. The neighbors. I would be. I would say that. I think is that all, anyone that has. You know, whatever reason. You're like, hey, you know, you could have a happy, you're actually, you're enjoying cash shares. If I'm looking for a budget, I want to go. Either don't want to even personally, even I'd be like, no, we're going I want to count you over. That same drive is one Walmart and one Carolina. So that might be, of course, we didn't. But you know, I was currently, I also see it's not, it's only something, it's just. Yeah. It's literally. Address. They're off of that. Look at it. I don't know. That's absolutely. I think I just want to show the work time. I'll get on. Here and so. What were your observations? I was very. That's a course. That's and so that doesn't take. Everyone also like
And you said that homeless issue.
No, that's, we had a sense of that was after and then they were being, because they knew that it. So that really doesn't feel safe going downtown, trying to, okay. We understand even that is, even if that, yeah, the perception is about it is that 2 o'clock. And I know exactly. And so when you have those perceptions, I think that people don't understand, they don't understand what you're doing, there's a little more transparent because don't meditate this. That's used to be at work, divorce those things. That helps. And that might be some, but then how that looks, I don't know, but that's to see it like and know that I know that it's not just and actually be at the same table. It's so hard. I think tell you every on February. That'll be a great call. That's one of the big ones to do. Yeah, and I don't. Nobody, we didn't get that. Nobody said they were great. It was more of a. Nobody might get like this made a report, but it was a, you just want to see. I didn't know that if I make it, then it is going across the street, and it's coming out. As far as. Right now, I mean, yeah, she believe that the process. Everything's gone. She and I usually. I've been a part of community decided so now it's involved. And she was talking about a lot of. We're talking about having like people are a lot of people. Right. Now it's there are 4 major. I don't read the wheels exactly. It's a lot of people. And maybe it's literally just signing. Like even if I can't give it to the review board, I need you to have seen what. So I don't know how to.
Yeah, definitely.
Remember. Another one to watch. Progress, you know. The board.
So there might be some features such as this stuff exists, you just have to dig into this. The website to see it, it might be. But I know. I
Was like, we're ready out. You wish I could have them. I'm sorry about the logistics.
But the often notice
It's not.
so technically, that was a concern.
Kind of rough.
Yeah.
So, one person said that they.
They said my person calls up the phone, they're gonna get it. They're gonna get it. So,
It's why.
I'm not saying it's not just fair, but it's not happening.
For one person.
And so.
Well.
Well, that's.
That somebody should be aware of.
And I think it's a constant. Anyone has that right. So, I think if I was great with our line, I get to know that I made the go.
In the.
And then they said,
a minute, just to wrap it up.
No, but I don't remember. They told me. Yeah.
And.
And I can remember it, like, watch the video.
And they were.
I talked to a lot of people. I really have.
About the complaint.
Care about everybody.
He did
Small part.
He put him there, especially there. Very individual, I see that's what I mean. I don't know, I think with some of the people, like when you were there.
I was sharing about ours.
And
It
did you
was,
have anyone like?
in group, we had 2 married couples, with very limited. So, just, greater accountability. They felt like the solution was investigating the complaints. There comes to lived experience is, about his interaction. So, perspective. It was a different source of perspectives.
But then, I mean, you can share the day.
One more.
Get up and kind of around here, so.
You know,
So we're just going,
It was, again, listening, what I've been trying to process.
Okay, so let me redirect your attention.
Okay.
Okay, so I heard some of this good discussion, but I want you to share with the full group, and obviously we're doing this before we're able to do a deep dive on some of the themes and insights, but I wanted to take a few minutes to hear what you learned, some of the highlights, things that stood out to you, and what you felt well, and then where we can improve for the future. So let me just throw it out there and invite you all to weigh in. Things you'd like to share with the group that stood out for you from community conversation number 1.
I think that the promotion of the event could be done in a certain way and it might increase people coming, but at our table, they thought that the event was the police's event and that we worked for the police. So there's a little bit of misinformation, I think, maybe, and maybe, I mean, this is people's own perceptions, but maybe just really the framing of it, like, that we are the work group. Kind of articulating that. This was after, I think you even gave a really great introduction at the event and maybe just people, really reiterating it.
Okay,
So I think it impacts the feedback that people give and if they come to the event or not.
okay, so we need to communicate that this is a work group sponsored event, not the police department's event. Is that?
And also I think clarify even again, that the work group is not the police.
Well, they asked me what was my job. No. I was like, yeah,
You just had that book about you. Sorry.
I guess it's that. Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I wondered to your point about younger people outreach, that could have been one thing.
My informal visual poll of the participants, there appeared to be a couple of demographics that were missing, especially younger people in our community. I would have liked to have seen, the 16 to 25 crowd. I think
Missing demographics, and particularly young people.
yeah. I was really glad that there was some community organizing groups that encouraged their membership to attend. I sat at a table with folks that had spent time together before on activist measures, and they were knowledgeable and enthusiastic participants, and I like that. I just would have liked to have seen more. Yes, I would have liked to see more. I know it was. I was trying not to call out a group. But it was very clear that they were knowledgeable and focused and dedicated, and they were enthusiastic participants. I feel like anything we come up with that doesn't have younger folks involved in will ultimately be obsolete in a short period of time. And if we want this to be long lasting, we need to make sure that those voices are captured as well.
Okay, that's great feedback. So there were some successes in that there were certain community groups that were particularly engaged who had obviously communicated with their membership and their constituency and encouraged them to attend and were well represented at the community conversation. But a deficiency perhaps is we didn't have enough young people represented. And so are there things that we can do differently between now and July 31st that would enable us to welcome and encourage more young people to attend community conversation 2? What might we do?
Probably go to where the younger folk are. I don't know where those are, but like I have long thought we should have a meeting in the library. It has AV capabilities. It has big rooms, big auditorium. It's more centrally located. That would probably help. I know we probably can't do the next public engagement meeting there. We probably have all the stuff set up for Carnegie, but like maybe one of these meetings or a couple could be there.
Okay.
This is not really a walkable location from where the majority of Lawrence lives.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not that. We actually looked at the library as a potential location for this, and it was not available for the dates that we had in mind for that. And the smaller rooms are too small for what we're doing. So, yeah, the library has a wonderful space, the big room. It's fantastic. It just wasn't available for the dates that we had.
And the community building downtown isn't either,
What's that?
the community building downtown.
We did explore that at one point. And, I think we could, I don't recall what if there was an issue with dates. But, there was one, I know one of the considerations is that we weren't necessarily guaranteed that there wouldn't be basketball or classes or activities going on above us at the same time. Because there's that great space down below the community building. And I've done a number of events there. It's just can be very noisy if you have other activities. So we could potentially explore that more.
It does not have AV capabilities.
Oh, that's right. And that the other problem is that it does not have the AV capabilities. So it's, we can bring it in, but there's not a lot of good options relative to that.
And at the table that I was at, it was lots of generations there, right? So we talked about having a few conversations between generations because the conversation between generations is very different. What may happen and that person could, whatever happened in your day may not happen in the same process as my day, right? So we need to be very cognizant of conversations between generations because it does feel different and it does sound different, even as we were conversing around the table.
Okay. And I noticed as I was transcribing notes that observation was made, that we had a couple of tables that had some really good, robust, cross-generational, intergenerational discussions. So, so that's great. Is that something that, well, with our efforts to engage more young people, that might be also something that just as people find their seat, that to the extent to which we can facilitate that in the moment to encourage that mixing of generations, we could potentially do that as well. So.
I know what would be helpful is, I like that there was a flyer, but if we could get a 1080 or 1400 by 1400, it's a 2x2, something for Instagram, be able to share more widely on social media. Both PDF and PNG of the flyer. And then maybe a more interactive, setup. So a lot of younger people in terms of community engagement want more self-led, prompts. They don't necessarily want to sit at a table and talk to people. They would like to go from maybe table to table and answer the prompts and like do more self-led, I guess, for their interactivity. So we could probably think about, maybe it's too soon for this upcoming, we're talking about recommendations that we ultimately give. I think to engage more young people, just kind of doing their speed, putting it in front of them where they see it.
Yeah, that's great feedback. So, so in terms of what we can do for the 31st, this would be an easy remedy in terms of getting an image out there, and we can ask city communications for that. But in terms of how we're engaging and like the technique for that, that's a really rich topic for discussion. And I think absolutely needs to be part of the thinking down the road and to your point, maybe included in recommendations. If you have thoughts on what specifically we might do on the 31st that can better leverage this, when people are there, please let me know. I've got a few ideas of what we can do. But I'd like to explore that more because I think that's great. And it needs to resonate. And we've said from the beginning, a lot of folks aren't interested in showing up to sit in a room for 2 hours. There's some choice points around, and some of you gave some good feedback in the raw notes about posing specific questions to get reactions as opposed to a more open-ended forum. And that's a design choice on from a facilitation perspective. When you give specific questions, The advantage to that is that you can more easily theme and group responses because people are responding to the same question. That's particularly important when you start asking questions, the difference between why type questions, where you're asking broadly, like what's important to someone, as opposed to how type questions, or where you're asking for specific examples. And it gets really messy to start doing meaningful analysis across multiple tables if there isn't enough structure to the question. So that's the rationale for that, because it tends to produce a little bit cleaner data. But the disadvantage is that you run the risk of asking a question that's not really what people want to talk about. And so you miss that opportunity. And so one of the ways that we tried to address that was ask several more specific questions. And then at the end, ask the what else question, the broad one, where people could share whatever was important to them. And we got all kinds of great responses on that as well. Any other, or what other comments do you want to share as part of this? This is very helpful.
There was a question that was multi-part, and the folks at my table weren't able to distinguish the differences. I'm talking about the question that was talking about accountability, public trust, forget the third item, but the three-part question. They had difficulty answering that one.
Okay, so that was
A lot of the discussion was about what does the question mean instead of answering the question.
yeah, so that was Q4. It was a question that asked what is important that you want the work group to know when you think of accountability, public trust, and oversight. Those are really big, complicated terms. And so I think that's the critique is that a very well-written question? I wrestled with that.
Did you write that one, Jonathan?
That was totally me. I wrote that. And when you get to the point where you start writing recommendations, you're going to be addressing accountability. You're going to be speaking of public trust. You're going to be wrestling with this question of oversight. I think when you see the types of responses that were generated, there were some really, really interesting and nuanced answers to this. So I think you'll be the judge of that. I think that you'll find that we got some really, really useful data where people were wrestling with how does this all fit together? And so when you begin to think of something like a CPRB and what we're trying to accomplish, what are all the considerations that might go into that? And so it was a different way of asking that. And this would typically not be like a good survey type question for all the reasons you said. But for discussion purposes, it generates a lot of thoughtfulness around the big picture of what we're trying to address. So that's why I went with it, but I'll welcome your feedback when we get more into the data to see if it really got where we needed to. But typically, if you're doing like a survey, you wouldn't link three concepts like that. But for discussion purposes, what we're doing.
The only thing that I really noticed at our table was kind of the methodology with the writing down the thoughts and the voicing their thoughts. So kind of noticed that a lot of the important feedback we obtained was verbal, and a lot of some of the ladies that were at our table were not able to really efficiently write down everything that they probably should have or could have that would have been useful. Sometimes they didn't write at all for a question mostly talk, or vice versa. So just kind of getting maybe a better grasp on the methodology that we use.
Most of those
And having that dialogue.
was not their vibe. The post-its.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's also a technique question. So if you're doing broad discussions, those are also just considerations. It's hard to take big concepts and distill it down to short, concise answers, especially in a limited amount of time, and also just using Post-it notes. And so that's also a technique to help frame, but there's a limiting factor to it as well. Okay. Anything else that you want to share at this point?
Well, we talked about at the table files, but Officer Schuyler explained files and how when you're pulled over or because we had a young lady at our table that had actually went to jail or prison or whatever the case may be, and speaking to her experience is I'm out and every time you turn around, the police is pulling for me for this or pulling me for that. Are there files being held? And Officer Schuyler was explaining to us at the table a moment ago. But I told him that whenever I see a uniform, I instantly get an attitude. I mean, I do. I know you guys laugh about that, but when I see that uniform and then you stick the uniform in my face, I instantly get an attitude. So, and it wasn't any different with the young woman that had went to prison. You have to figure out how do you hold yourself back from not having the attitude, because I told Officer Schuyler, I'm glad I'm not in the skin because that's how I see that uniform. And so how our partner said, how do we get around that and making sure that the process works? So that is what we had a little bit of conversation about. And as a baby boomer, I felt that what she was saying is, I mean, even though the officer says, he or she may say, you know, I don't hold files or anything mentally or paper files. If you feel like you're being followed, he's on your back all the time. Oh my God. You know, so I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to say for that.
Was thank you for sharing that. Was the comment prompted by the dynamic in the group or the presence of an officer, or how?
It had all to do with accountability, public trust, and oversight of the process.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it emerged out of that particular question
Yeah.
discussion.
And everyone around the table's experience was either very similar, and it didn't matter the generation, right? And those born and bred here in Kansas versus those of us from the East Coast, those, you know, from the West Coast, it was similar. The experiences were similar. So even when I joined this committee, I had apprehensions myself. Because when you come from the coast and you're dealing with the police all the time, whether it's perceived or real, it's really happening. It's really happening to that person. And so, because I'm over legal redress for the NAACP, I've heard this more than once from various folks within this community. So thank you, Officer Schuyler, for the explanation, but I'm like, I don't know how to address that.
Well, it's an important issue, and I'm glad that we're, you know, one of our challenges was how do we help people speak to lived experience and specific to their interactions with police. The fact that that conversation happened in that sense, we didn't resolve anything, but I see it as a success that we've created space where people can begin talking about that. Because those kinds of insights and to create an environment where people are feeling okay to share that. Will hopefully inform however you begin to approach recommendations and how that goes forward, because that's someone's experience, and it sounds like it had resonance for a number of people, and so that's what we hope to draw out when you engage with the community. So thank you for that. Other comments?
I just had a question. Did everyone get to sit at a table and have that? Did everyone get to sit at a table that showed up
Everyone, you mean of
At
this
the
work group or of the community?
of the community? That attended the event?
So did everyone who came get to sit at the table? So as facilitator, I do a few things to kind of set the tone and to try and enable good discussion. I always personally greet anybody and everybody who walks in. That's just part of my thing. So once you all settled in, as you noticed, we filled up. All the tables filled up, and then we had to add an extra table in the back and just add some chairs because we were getting full. And so what I did was I would note anytime somebody individually walked in, after we started, I would reach out to them and then invite them to sit down. So, and thank you for letting me ask a couple of you to move around as well, because we had one table that was a little lighter and in attendance. And so we redistributed. And then when the next person walked in who arrived late, I was able to walk over and you all welcomed them into your table, which I appreciate. So to answer your question, yes, I believe so. And if anybody felt left out at any point, then please let me know that, because I was very intentional about that. So I think we managed to do that. There were a couple of individuals who chose not to sit at a table. So that's the other thing. They knew the plan. They were invited, gave them multiple options, and they were, I'm good. And that's fine. That's great. We'll work with it. And then I showed them other ways that they contribute by filling out their own Post-its and doing it that way. So, okay.
Could you detect a reluctance to sit at a table with a uniformed police officer?
You know, I actually was curious about that because I didn't observe it, but you know, I had a different perspective. So people walk into a room and they see choices and they kind of just, I mean, you all do this.
There weren't any uniforms.
And so I didn't notice.
The folks that are in uniform were wearing plain clothes.
Great, thank you.
On that note, the people at my table, they were concerned about how much influence the police had in with what we came up with. They actually felt that the police should just be kind of brought in later after we've already gone through the process and decided how it's going to work. They were concerned about that. The other thing they mentioned was, I didn't know the answer. When there is a complaint, where do they go in the future? The type of neutral location would that be? So, and the other young lady was very concerned, as I am, how many African Americans or how many, who's pulled over? What do those numbers look like? Who is being, how many times at this many stops, how many were black, how many were repeatedly pulled over? So those are basically their concerns. They're pretty vocal about, I believe one of them had served on a similar committee. I'll have to ask him about that. He's a defense attorney, I can't remember his name, but he felt that, I don't know if it's the transparency or just for the community to feel that this is actually what the community wants and not the police are trying to help
they want to make sure it's from the community and not from its influence. And so they felt that the police should be part of it after it's already said and done.
Okay.
So that was.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing a few different things. So concern about how much influence the police had during the discussion or the process in general. And even some suggestions that maybe it's more conducive or preferable to have certain conversations if police weren't present for that. And so that's come up, and when you weigh in on the notes, you'll see a couple of comments to that. And you'll also see comments where people are saying, ultimately, this is community-based work that needs to have community members and police together in order to have the conversation and have those and to identify recommendations together. So I heard that throughout, but I think there's some important attention that we need to pay to not only how is it represented, but are there certain times or circumstances where we might need to look at the approach to this so that people are able to weigh in accordingly. And in the room, I think the question about, do people choose to not sit at a table where they saw someone who might be a police officer? That's maybe addresses a concern at some level, but not if it's a broader concern about the process in general. And then the other thing that I'm hearing you say that you picked up on is that when we bring folks together, it just generates a lot of questions more broadly about wanting to know about the complaint process. And that's great, because that's what we're here to do. And then just wanting more data, who gets pulled over, demographics, those kinds of things. And so these are good things to note that aren't necessarily the purview of the work group, but it's things that we can flag to pass on to the CPRB, to the inform the recommendations, and then to the police department to say, these are the kinds of questions we heard from the community that we want to give service to through our efforts and wherever we can.
I do think that the purview though is the process of how we're meeting and where and when the conversations happen. When I got the chance to work with 7th graders across North Public Schools, the very last session of the 10 or so sessions that I would have with them in their English classes was specifically only the students of color, and in a space where there were no white teachers or white gays. And so I think that that is relevant to maybe some of our conversation happening in a different way, so that there's community trust in what we come up with. Because I define accountability as the accurate response to a diversity of stakeholder needs. And so mostly when people say that they want accountability, they're critiquing the accuracy of the response or the diversity of the needs being met. So that is relevant to the making sure that what we come up with is accurate and a diversity of needs.
Yeah, that's great. I love that definition. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I just want to note that. Okay, this is really great. This is very helpful. We have a really big lift this evening to weigh in on the complaint process. And so I would like to pivot from this and invite you to do a couple of things. We're about to hear a presentation on the complaint process and then do some Q&A related to that. Before you mentally leave this conversation about the community conversation debrief, I want you to be thinking about what kinds of information we might want to learn and what questions we might want to ask on July 31st that will further our efforts related to this. And so we're going to do a deep dive on the complaint process, but I'll take all these into account in design, and then if you have additional thoughts, let me know. As we pivot to the complaint process, let me just invite you to do a couple of things. want you to take copious notes while we're doing this. We're gonna have a PowerPoint presentation from the police department that's gonna walk us through the complaint process. And I believe that what we want to do, have them present so you can hear how it currently is. And then we'll do our Q&A after that. So while you're taking notes, please write down your questions. And then anything that stands out for you, because over the next couple of sessions, we're going to be really getting our hands in on this, because this is the heavy lift for the work group. So so while we pivot, grab some food if you need to, take a really quick break, and we'll get the PowerPoint and all that ready to go, and then we'll jump into it. Okay, thank you. Notes. I'd like to prompt you to also write, like, when you think of the complaint process and oversight and what you look to accomplish through a complaint process, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 most important things to you that you want to see in that process?
The complaint process.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna be a problem real quick. I think something that needed to be talked about is called the debrief from the community conversation, and that also needed to break before being talked about is the information that was dropped off by Michael Arabi before the meeting started. It is something that at the very least we need to discuss. If it's been discussed with the police like internally already, then we should be informed of that. There are concerns. I have concerns that I do not want this oversight group to be viewed as more of the same, where we're not going to handle a situation that we've been made aware of. I watched the whole video. I have other concerns. There were commentary. I don't know who said what. I am not good at voice recognition to put that to a face. But there are comments about waiting for the opportunity to arrest the guy. And then like kind of derisive comments about the lawsuit. That like, yeah, go ahead and sue. We don't care. That's not great. It's not a good look. It should be discussed in this group whether or not we need to take action. I'll leave to the group. But it is a conversation that I think needs to be had. There's a history there. I understand that history. I don't know all the details of that history between Mr. Arabi and the Lawrence Police Department, but we cannot ignore someone just because they're angry. That is one of our community guidelines as part of this group. But you know, if this has been something that's been internally discussed afterwards by the police, that should be probably shared with us so that we know what to expect going forward.
So, do you have anything, because if not, I probably do. So,
I think this is for Jonathan.
okay.
So I had a couple of, thank you for bringing that up, because I had a couple of thoughts. One, there's been throughout the life of the work group, a discussion of who serves on the work group, how are those decisions made? The broader questions of what's the work group's purpose, but how is that all navigated? As you all know, some of you threw your hat in for consideration to serve on the work group way back in probably August, or maybe even July, something like that of last year, when the city commission created the work group and then put out the announcement looking for people to volunteer. And so some of you have been part of this whole process. And then others of you just came into the work group through the city commission's most recent action, which would have been in April, when they passed the resolution to clarify the work group's mission, and then also delineate who would be serving on the work group. So from my perspective, one of the things that I've been focused on is give me 12 people that serve on the work group so that the work group can do its work. So that's been kind of my position on that, and my frustration throughout is because, as you know, we've had we had turnover on the work group, but we had years of turnover on the CPRB leading up to this. And that helped complicate the launch of the work group itself. And so in terms of who serves on this, that is the responsibility of the city commission to determine who serves, and then nominations happen, and then it goes in front of the commission as part of the mayor's appointments, and then the commission approval of that. So in terms of who serves in this group, that's not a role that I have or that we collectively have. However, as facilitator, I'm very concerned that we need the conditions in place that enable us to fulfill our responsibility of producing a set of recommendations. And so anything that gets in the way of that, that's going to be on my radar and I'm concerned about. And so when I learned of concerns relative to this, that was something that I wanted to elevate to get clarity on, to say, we need to be able to move forward and meet our responsibility as a work group.
And
That was not an answer. I'm sorry, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, that's right.
then
What I
what
meant.
was the
Well,
response?
Isn't part of the answer that? So how do we, the question will be, do we make that type of concern complainable?
Well, I mean, we have a representative from the city. I think that if nothing else, you now know that I have a concern. That this board, some other members of this oversight committee might have a concern that should be looked into by the city. If the city has appointed every single member, because I thought the police members were appointed by the police.
Commission, just to.
Yeah,
not
sorry,
to
city
cut you off, But I did,
But-
I work for the city, but the city, I answer to my boss, the city manager, who answers to the city commission. So I don't direct the
Sure.
city commission.
Sure,
So
but you can direct my concerns to your boss, who then can direct it to the city commission. You have a
yes.
causal link.
And I guess what I would say is, so can all of you. Like,
Okay, then I'll go tomorrow to the meeting.
you all can be in contact with the city commission.
I will voice my concerns at the public meeting tomorrow then.
And I will say, just
It
to
doesn't wanna
complete the conversation, that these concerns are known about by the commission. They are known about by the city manager. We have looked into this matter and consider that it is absolutely fine for you all to continue with the makeup of the work group that you all that are in this room right now.
So does the city not care about the concerns of the citizenry
I didn't say that. I said we looked into them.
and dismiss them?
I did not say that.
That seems to be the result. Is that you were like, nope, it's fine. We don't care that we have an officer on record supporting an officer who lost his accreditation to be an officer in Kansas for his egregious acts. And then also in that same video saying, I can't wait to arrest that guy. Oh, do you want to arrest him? Do I want to arrest him? I don't know. It would be great to do so. And then also, I can't wait for him to sue. It'll be great. I know he's just building for a lawsuit. I don't care. That is concerning to me as a community member tasked with making sure that the Citizens Police Review Board is independent and not marred by these concerns. And I'm getting, well, we thought about it. Nope, not an issue. Is there not another officer who does not have these issues? Because if every officer has an issue like this on record, which I know is not true, then we have a deeper problem.
I don't know if it's helpful. The department did provide a statement. That's the city statement on this matter.
Okay. Because, can I hear the statement?
I'll be happy to read it to you. We were asked by a media outlet.
Okay.
And they've not printed it as of yet, and this was as of last week sometime on Thursday or Wednesday, I can't remember. We appreciate the public's right to free speech and fully support it. While the department would not typically respond to a statement made from public comment at a commission meeting, we feel strongly about responding when those words are misleading, attack the character of an individual, and are purposed with the intent to disrupt an important public process. Officer Richardson has an impeccable service record, excellent character, and has earned his good standing as a valuable member of the Lawrence Police Department and the Community Police Work Group. It is disheartening to see that reputation grossly misrepresented by a member of the community who is using shock to mislead and attempt to promote division and anger. The Dolores Police Department proactively investigated and sustained the former officer's actions, which led to his dismissal. In the video in question, Officer Richardson was discussing a technical portion of his police training where his expertise is used to recognize evidence of impairment once an officer suspects it exists after an individual has already been arrested. The element that he was discussing was in no way related to the former officer's dismissal. Officer Richardson was not privy to those personnel discussions regarding the former officer. And the comments he is being criticized were not related to the actions that led to the former officer's dismissal. This conversation was taken out of context, and the individual's comments to the city commission and the public were harmful and purposely malicious.
Okay.
And I double down on Skylar's character. It's unfortunate, but we're doing that.
I think though that it, maybe we could just voice that as a concern. I think for me, I'm giving a lot of free time to this project and I have a limited schedule. And I would like to know that what I'm working on has the community's trust. And so I think that, you know, there's fact-based, but then there's also kind of a perception. And so I would hope that the city and the LPD would do what it can so that my work here isn't in any way downgraded or distrusted, or I have a bit of a personal brand too. I'm a little bit worried about that. And then the affiliation that's happening with that as I make, you know, my money is from personal consulting. So I have a financial stake, I have a personal stake, I have a respect stake for the other people that are on the work group. And so I think to kind of bolster Harrison, what Harrison's mentioning, I think that this is almost a result of having police representation as 4 members on the work group. And we do need to think about the public perception of them a little bit aside from fact-based. And so what I'm kind of hearing and seeing is that there's a little bit of like perception going on, and that's still very serious. To me.
To be clear, not impugning Officer Richardson's character. I don't know you. So I like to assume that people are good people. But this is the concern that I have. And it's just like what was said, that we have to be cognizant of the public eye. Always.
Yeah, there's a small task or rearrangement that we can do to get the community's trust in this process. I mean, a lot of tax dollars, money's going to this process, people's volunteer time is going to this process. If it's an easy fix, I would hope that the efforts would be made to do an easy fix.
Well,
One of the things that the people at my table repeated was that they have participated in similar activities in the past and that they ultimately failed. And I would hate for public perception, whether it's correct or not, to ultimately cause a failure. Because at the end of this, we need to give recommendations to ask the city commission for them to vote on it. And if it doesn't have the support of the community, they won't be in any way motivated to approve our recommendations.
Well, I would like to point out too, you're concerned about your brand. My brand's the Lawrence Police Department. That's what I was hired to come here and be. And I am concerned about that, not in this context, but in the greater context of this work group. And, you know, when we want to listen to what's going on in our community and figure out a way that people want police to be around. I mean, the fact that we hear from people, if they don't want us at meetings, that's horrible. Why we need to, as a police department, figure out why does that happen and fix it. And that's not okay. You know, and I when we hear that, I think that's part of this underlying thing of figuring out. And, you know, like you, we're all here. I'm not getting paid to be here. It's part of my job, but we're all here when we could be home with our families. And we're in the same position you are. And we think this work's important. That's why we want to be here to do it. And, you know, one thing I think we need to remember is that last week at the city commission meeting, Michael Irby made a statement that said he broke our community police review board. And the next thing he is going to focus on is breaking this work group. And he's already started. He's attacked Brenda, he's attacked Skylar, and after them, it's going to be somebody else. And you can talk to Greg, you can talk to Dr. Turner, you can talk to Brenda, you can talk to any of the former members of the community police review board. And he broke it. And we can't let him break this. And I don't know what that means for us. I don't know how to address Harrison's concerns or others' concerns. But what I know is that he is not interested in this group finishing this work and taking something to our city commission to make the complaint process better, to make oversight better, to make our police department have better relations with our community. That is not his interest. I know that. I've been dealing with this man for 1.5 years. And if you, like I said, ask one of these folks that are on the community police review board, they're not meeting anymore. Because this man was in there every month, yelling and screaming at them in a way that was scaring them. And
disrupting the work.
yeah, and so, and again, his own words last week, I broke your CPRB, I am going to break your work group. And I say we can't let him do it. We have, this work is too important to let that happen.
So one of the things that I want to be attuned to in our work is that we get feedback from the community. It comes in all different ways. I've been very cognizant from before we even gathered here as a group to engage people who were actively contributing feedback on the CPRB broadly, to begin to get a sense of what's important to the community, what are the concerns, and how might that inform the work that we do accordingly. And so we want to make sure that when people are critiquing the CPRB or the work group, that we're listening to that we're capturing it, that it's folded in. Many people attended the community conversations to give that direct feedback, and we've got all of those responses, and we'll get even more on the 31st. And so that's part of what we're here to do. We also have to ensure the integrity of our work and our process. And so I hear that that's one of the concerns, is that we need to speak to this and make sure that we're able to fulfill what the community is looking for us to do, and that's to generate some recommendations for solutions to clean up something that's been messy and difficult for quite some time. And so whatever we need to do to be able to realize that, that's how we honor the work that the commission has put in front of us, and that's how we honor the hundreds of comments that people have given to us so far in the community conversations, and the hundreds more that we'll receive on July 31st. And so I want to make sure that we are intentional in capturing the critiques, however they come, whether we like them or not, and if they're in the form that they arrive, that's honored through our process, and they're captured whether folks are at the community conversation or not. And so that's been on my radar from the beginning, and I want to invite you to help further that as well. And I want to make sure that we are mindful of our process and the integrity of our work here, so that it's not in vain, so that we didn't just waste taxpayer dollars, all of your time, the commission's time, the department's time, the staff's time, and all of that, because this is difficult work and it's challenging. And in the public sector, when you are dealing with public monies and public processes and public resources, it's public, so everybody has an ability to weigh in, but we need to make sure that we are able to do the work that we need to do and take all that into account accordingly. As this is being addressed or playing out, as your concerns are coming up, we also have to keep doing the work. And so I think part of it is, I don't necessarily know that I've got a solution for you on this, it's going to solve it right now, but I know that we still also have work to do at the same time. And so to the extent to which you can you can live in those two worlds right now, I think that's the work that we need to do, because we've got a very limited time frame. This work group is here and then it's gone. And our legacy as a work group will be the recommendations that are put forward that the city can then take action on, with the hope that we have greater oversight, we have greater outcomes through the CPRB and any related work. And that will be our product.
And to add on to that, I am hearing brand, I am hearing pay, I am hearing all of those things. But I will tell you, character, anyone's character in this place, right here, right now, can be damaged at any time. And it can be damaged falsely. So when that man came up to me with that piece of paper, I was like, you know, you can see a saboteur in the room to mess up any given process. So it's up to you or up to us to figure out what is worth that and what is not worth that. Because I have lived in my lifetime to see character being damaged on a regular basis, on an everyday basis in the job that I have worked in. So whether you step right or left, your brand officer, I know about brand. I know about the name, and I know about the skin in which I live in every day. So to me, anyone can step in the space and mess up the process. And if it is up to us whether or not we allow it. So we know that lots of us have been nominated to do the work. All we can do is do the work, try to understand the process, try not to get upset with the uniform, but we just have to do the work. And if you walk away from here feeling like your brand has been damaged, I would say no. Because your brand will not be damaged over one individual walking in, because you know when you walk in your skin every day, even with your child, you already know all the junk that you've gone through. You know it already. So to me, we're here about doing the work. We need to understand what your process is as officers, as you look at how you structure all of that. And now I will leave it alone.
I want to make one more comment about character. When this all came up, I, number one, asked for a clean copy of the video so I could hear the context. It was refused. Number two, I ran into Skylar Richardson in the hallway in the courthouse, and we had a conversation about some of what was going on there. And as I walked away from that, I thought, I hope that when somebody has really messed up and really suffered the consequences for it, I have the graciousness to look at that person and say, yes, but here's something he was good at. I mean, to me, that's character, where he was not looking at the man for what he did wrong. He was looking at the man for what he did well. And I was impressed by that.
I think we're equating the process breaking or the group breaking with addressing a complaint about somebody. And I just want to, as we're ending that conversation, let's not do that black and white thinking. I think that we can address concerns so that the public trusts the process and the process doesn't have to stop. It speaks to the power dynamics to assume that switching out an officer on the work group would stop the process a little bit. So I don't know, just something to think about.
And I'm looking at the process.
Thank you for this. I appreciate that. This is important work. This is the work process and and how it's perceived is critically important. Also, this experience, I think, is informative of the recommendations that you all craft. And so as you think about what you tackle or how you approach it, what all is that included, we're in a unique space here where you're literally invited in to produce recommendations and potential solutions. And so that's the work at hand. And so, and all the messaging that goes around that is every bit as important as well. So thank you for that. We've got a few minutes left here, and we've got a bunch of other things to cover. And we also have a very heavy lift of July 31st for our next community conversation. So I want to do a little process with you all to figure out how you best want to do this. Because I also need to get some resource recommendations from you for the group. We had originally slotted about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes for conversation of our mapping exercise. And we are pushing up way into that, but we needed to have this discussion. So I want to honor that and appreciate that. And I also was going to float the idea of potentially seeing if you might be game for adding a work session on next Monday to further our work. But I was already thinking of that in advance because we've got a lot to do. But let me just throw it back to the group and tell me what you're thinking and how you want to proceed.
Seems like we either stay later tonight or we need to meet again before the next community talk.
We'll also have more information from the community conversation next week than we have tonight.
Right.
So we
I
probably ought to be here.
I will be out of the country.
I'll be on stage.
I will be out of town.
And that was why we originally stayed away from the, so 3 of you would not be present next week?
30th anniversary.
Okay.
Is there another day that week?
We've been pretty set on Mondays, but I think for people traveling, that's gonna potentially take out the week. And in any case, no matter whether we're in person or not, there's a lot of work that's gonna need to happen, just where you're pointing to your notes at your leisure and as you're able. And feeding back in input accordingly. Can we negotiate going longer tonight? Is that what you want to do? Is that an option? Do you want to expand our time beyond our 8 o'clock end time this evening so that we can get through presentation? And does that create hardships for folks?
Need to call home to see.
Okay.
Is it not possible to add another meeting at some other point, like later calendar, so we can? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think we might need a little time to reflect and maybe some more research, just reflect and think on things. Sometimes we need to take a pause so we're not reacting just like on emotion. Because we don't want an attacking character. I'm trying to keep my eye on the ball. War versus, battle. What is the end result? How do we want to get there? When we get there with a clear head, and not how some of us might be feeling right. Because I feel a little overwhelmed, and I don't feel that I would be mentally in the best place right now, given the information that I received. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So
I'm a pause person.
yeah, no, thank you for that. So question is, do we need to find another time and space to do this this work. We had already built in a pause on the schedule so that July 31st is our next community conversation. But then we had structured a pause between this work session and our next, which is August 14th. Because we've got a number of resources that we're gonna need you to be looking at and reviewing, formulating thoughts, beginning to map that out. So I wasn't anticipating that we were going to be having this particular conversation at this time, but we do have some space allowed there already. I just want to make sure that we go into our plans for July 31st with some clarity so because that's where that ship's launched. So we want to honor that with the community, but make sure that we have all that we need so that we're prepared on the 31st. Most of what I need, I've got, but I would like to get your input on some follow-up questions. And so we can spend a few minutes talking about that now, or I can draft those, push them out to you and ask for feedback, and we can post drafts on the portal.
And is there a possibility that we could get the slides of the current process or the complaint process? Or no?
It's not built in that manner. It's built to kind of walk through, discuss. It's not like just the play policy. So it's
Yes.
context of conversation. It's like.
Oh,
Why don't we do that and then hold our questions?
yeah.
It's 15. So your presentation is 15 minutes and then
that may-
Q&A.
Or even more questions to ask.
I think we're better to pause. And it's only where it could place as a group, but that's just opinion and 1 of 12, or 1 of 11 tonight.
I'd rather have questions immediately afterward.
I mean,
Yeah, my memory's not what it
the
used to be.
presentation was designed to be interactive.
Right.
It's not
Oh,
like you didn't understand it. It's,
Okay.
you're gonna have to follow along with it.
So it's not like a PowerPoint. It's you're interacting throughout today. Okay.
Yeah, there's like pictures.
And then if we're,
that
if we're 2 or 3 weeks
explaining
later, before we're talking about it again, we probably have to run through it again just to refresh everyone's memory.
Okay, so let me just throw this out then. So if given that, what if we are to push out the resources for your homework in the meantime? The NACO resources, the city gate study, the ordinances, and that you spend time reading through that. The advantage of doing that is that you'll have more of a framework coming in. So as you hear the police department present, you'll already have in mind thinking of recommended practices, best practices, so you can critique to see, is it reflected in the current process or not? That will help you prompt some of the questions. And then when you get to the point where you start scoping out recommendations, you'll be able to draw on what you've learned and then also what we heard presented from the department. So how about if we do that instead? So we front load the review of all the community conversation 1 notes, all discussion notes up to this point, and then resource documents that you look those over, and then we will reconvene. And our next meeting is, it will be a bit because it's scheduled for August 14th. But that's when we'll next reconvene as a work session. How does that sound? Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, and I think if you can share the drafts of the community conversation questions over email, we can look at them as well ahead of the 31st. Yeah.
Okay. Would Casey, would it be possible on the portal to have a place where we can post drafts that are under discussion here, so that we have a common place to go and the public can see what that is and has access to that, since we wouldn't be doing it during the meeting?
Yeah. So you're gonna post the drafts So the public will see the drafts before they're the final versions. That's my only concern.
When you say drafts, what do you mean?
I imagined they were gonna be a draft questionnaire like the last time, but maybe I'm not
Yeah, just,
understanding.
just a new set of questions, or we can structure it within the agenda. I've already scoped out what the agenda is, so we can have the discussion questions in draft form in the agenda. And then just mark it as draft. And and we can add some language on the site to explain what we're considering before we finalize that for the 31st.
Just so I understand, you will send out the notes from all of the participants and the survey results. We will read those independently and then submit questions to you that we would like to be asked, and you will compile them in a draft form online for us to review before the meeting. Is that what we're saying?
If you want to originate some questions, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm happy to take the first go at it, first draft, and then you can react to those. So we did basically a combination of that approach last time because I presented some draft questions. You tweaked them, made them better, and then you also offered up a couple of your own questions that got included in that. So so we can.
I think it's a little different because I think it should be our questions in reaction to the information, and we haven't gotten the information yet.
Okay.
So your questions might be on par with what we're thinking, but it might not be. And so I just wonder if we review the information and then view your questions, if that would put us in an editing role instead of a responding role.
Okay, sure, sure.
So
Okay.
that was my thought.
Yeah, no, that's great. So let me ask this. So you'll get the notes and all prior discussion notes, and then I'll just put it in the form of I'll ask you to review that and then ask yourself, based on what we learned at the first community conversation and seeing the data in front, what discussion questions do we want to pose for community conversation number 2 that build upon that?
And I'm sure if we're all looking at the same information, our questions will come in themes that can be synthesized. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, so think about as you engage the community, re-engage with the community, and now knowing how those discussions flowed. And when you're sitting with a group of neighbors at your table, what kinds of information do you need to learn from them that will be helpful as you craft out recommendations in August? And then in August, that's when we will dedicate work sessions to debriefing all the data from community conversations 1 and 2. And then we'll take each resource document and ask for, and just discuss, what did you learn from it? What insights did you glean from this? And how does this inform your thinking? And then, so that will be the August 14th work session. And then August 21, we'll ask you to start looking at some initial ideas for your recommendations.
Because there's 2 weeks in between the second and our meeting.
Yeah.
Will we have access to that information before our meeting so that
Yes.
we can use more of our time moving forward rather than debriefing?
Yeah,
We essentially did a 2-hour debrief today.
yeah, so I have it on my timeline that we meet on Monday that I have to get in front of you by that Friday,
Yes.
which would be whatever that is, August 3rd or something like that.
And this isn't really the way that people that come out to the community. I didn't see it. Was there a guest book or something that we know who was there that participated? I don't know if we need to thank them, but they did spend their time as well. And I think when you're saying you feel like, oh, they valued my time and they're listening to them. So even a follow up to those people. I don't know if that was done. I don't know all of the working, but if not, if they're willing to, I think it's important to find out who they are and to even, follow up with them and
Yeah,
thank them for coming out and supporting.
yeah, absolutely. So the question is, did we register people or did they sign in or anything? Do we know who all was there at the community conversation? We chose not to do it that way because we were just wanted to invite people in and who showed up, and we thought that it might impact on some people's willingness or comfort level to engage.
Not mandatory, but if
Yeah.
they wanted to,
But the other
very engaged.
Yeah, the other thing is we want to make sure that we are appreciative of people's time and inputs and energies. And so I would offer up a couple of things. So one, anybody that you know that was there, please reach out and thank them for taking the time to do that. This is important work and they were there and they got their input in there and we appreciate that. More formally, what we will do is at the community conversation 2, we will reflect back through PowerPoint slides what we learned from community conversation 1. So we'll be able to speak to the themes and insights and some representative quotes that are actual participants. So people should be able to look and see, I participated and here's a report out of the work that I got to help create. And so they'll see that reflected in each of the work we do. One of the biggest challenges in this work is doing great community engagement. And one of the worst things that you can do is invite people in, get their feedback, and then 1, never thank them or acknowledge it, and then 2, not make use of it. And so one of the things that I will challenge all of you to do is as you begin to talk about this work and begin to map out your recommendations, we need to be very intentional of communicating back to the community. Here's what we learned from you, and this is how it informed our recommendations. And so we want to make that really an intentional link there accordingly. And that's part of the IEP to consult model. That's part of our charter as well. We talked about so. Okay, that's a lot. Other questions? Yes.
Well, so I don't want to put the cart before the horse, and it seems kind of weird that I would hand out a ordinance from a city that I worked for over 10 years and helped them implement their community review board. But I think that's why I'm on this committee, probably. One of the reasons is the experience I've had doing it. And in a system that worked, at least for the city of Fort Collins, it worked. And I'm not suggesting that everything they did there is what we want to do here or recommend here. But I think there'll be some good ideas there that address some of the issues that I think are coming up about trust and being broader in the subjects that can be complained about to reach the board. And so I was going to hand out a copy of the Fort Collins ordinance tonight. We haven't gotten as far along as I thought we might have, and people may or may not have an interest in it, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity that if people have an interest in it, to get it to them at a point when they can read it, have time to read it. So I'm prepared to hand that out tonight, if that's okay, and to ask that it be put onto the website, if that's okay, or am I jumping the gun?
Well, that's exactly what we need to know is what kind of resources you want to get. So let me make sure I understand you. So you have professional experience having worked in a city that also had a community police review board. And so you're wanting to offer up as a resource to this group, the ordinance that city used.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I will just share with you one thing that I read, is that any kind of CPRB like entity tends to be very unique to its locale. They each have their own nuance and structure to them. And so I have no idea what this one looked like, but it sounds like it's also a good resource to inform your thinking. So, just to clarify, this is one of multiple resource documents, and this may or may not be anywhere near what you might envision for your own recommendations, but it's a good resource to be able to try to utilize.
You said this was 10 years ago?
I retired from Fort Collins City Attorney's Office in 2015. But I called them, I know the attorneys who still provide advice to their board. And so I got the most recent copy of their ordinance and shot the breeze with her on how's it working out.
Is there any data about how it's working out or how it has worked?
I'm sure they have data. I haven't tried to gather it. And I think there's also a possibility I could get I'm thinking, now maybe this is pie in the sky, but I'm thinking I could get the chair of that CRB to come and do a Zoom call with us to tell you firsthand what they think, how it's working.
Well,
That might be more than you want, and maybe that's down the road. And
I just kind of want to know what the efficacy of the policy is as compared to what it was before, to determine if it would be a good fit for us. Is kind of the thought I was thinking. But
I was kind of offering it because I think you'll see they've addressed some of the issues that we're talking about. Not all of them, maybe not good enough, maybe. So, but they address it. And so that's what I was offering up. And then their experience there, how many complaints they have.
yes, that's how many they had before and how many they've had since.
Yeah, they've probably had it 15 years or more. And so I don't know that they'll have a lot of stats from beforehand, but I could try to get the stats.
Or even just like what the effect of the policy has been on the policing. So steps that they've taken in light of the feedback that they've received from the community, who's making complaints, how their complaints are used. I understand that we have the policy, but I also want to see the accompanying result of the policy to see if it would have the type of effect we're looking for,
So,
which we haven't even decided as a group.
yeah, so I'm hearing a couple things. So this is one of multiple resources that we'll use. If we look at any sample ordinances from other cities, the request is, can we also get some data to show how effective or successful that particular ordinance has been, or the way that that's structured. And so it's an additional ask. Let me just ask as a follow-up. There are 18,000 law enforcement departments in the United States. There are fewer than 200 of them have a community police oversight body in those same communities. There are a number of great resources out there from other cities that we can look at. Some of which are quite large cities, others might be comparable in size, I don't know. But would it be useful if we can also find one or two other examples from other cities that you can also draw upon as part of your reference? Would that be useful as well?
Well, that wasn't something that a member of someone that was sitting at our table, a member of the community, former police officer did bring that up.
Okay.
So it might
That would
be
be a
worth
value.
shot.
I think what you're saying is we can learn from their mistakes, so we don't make some of the same mistakes, or strengthen the areas that they're weak in. So
Yeah.
we're starting from.
I feel like and please remember, don't take this as a slight, right? But there could be another person who's like, oh, look at the Lawrence policy that I helped draft, right?
Right.
And so the policy on its face might have lots of lovely nuggets that we want to pull. But ultimately, if it's not having robust engagement and then effective response, then maybe that's not a policy that we want to pull references from or inspiration from. But
Okay.
Please don't take that as a.
No.
Yeah, but that's
But
great.
rather just, I think that there's a lot of policies out there that on its face look great, but then in action doesn't garner the attention.
I've seen this one vetted out though, so in my mind, it's pretty damn good. But, yeah, I've got a bias there,
But that-
so I
Yeah,
appreciate.
that's just your opinion. Couple other resources that we'll put in front of you. And member Templeton of the, it's late. Member Littleton, excuse me, of the CPRB had put on my radar, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, known as NACOL. And so they have, a number of resources that we can reference to inform your thinking. We also have, and these are all key documents that will be listed on the portal. The ordinance that established the CPRB to begin with. And then the prior draft ordinance that had been worked on in the community. There's some additional articles about advisory boards broadly that are also part of available to you to be looking at to inform your thinking. So you have the task of creating a set of recommendations. Part of that charge, and I'm looking for even more clarity as we can get from the city commission, is to not only put forward your recommendations, but to be able to delineate pros and cons of various choices within that. And so, so as you're reading through these documents, think about all the things surrounding what could potentially become an ordinance, but all the other recommendations that you would put forward to ensure success. And we want to be able to explain, if you choose this, pros and cons, if you chose this, pros and cons as part of that. All right, so basically we're looking at you to become, if not experts, at least a whole lot more knowledgeable than anybody else that's tasked with looking at this right now, so that you can make informed recommendations.
Are there any resources that come from our Lawrence Police Department that might be useful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what resources do we need to get or that might be useful from the department to inform this work?
We were gonna give you our complaint policy, and we've got any of our policies are online, if any of those are resources that you're looking for.
Yeah, I remember we met, you and me met with, someone at the department, sorry, I can't remember his name, yeah, well, was it Cooper? I don't know if it was Cooper, but, really when it came down to your guys' stance on like, community policing, kind of like the kind of revision and the new way that you guys approach community-based policing and, community engagement and some of those,
Was it
but
great?
some of those.
did great.
It was Grady.
Yeah, so I thought those might even just be useful, because at the end of the day, you know, we're kind of limited here because we don't have, too much background on the complaints that, you know, are coming in and the data collection efforts. So I would just think that, you know, if we're making a set of recommendations, we're missing the key agency here, you know, here, our police department. So I'm trying to think of what might be available to try to, you know, as I'm thinking of what recommendations I would make, I would want to know what our police department has available in terms of resources, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So that was our plan. That was plan A tonight, was to actually get a presentation from the department. So we weren't able to do that, but so we will get the presentation on the current complaint process. And then in terms of the other needs there, policies, how can we access that if people want to start reading ahead?
Our historical policies are one they get updated every 6 months. The biggest issue is that we're doing CLIA right now, and so. Part of my job every day is to go in and alter certain policies, so it's not it's just like there's all policies on community policing, all this kind of things. This policy has been updated because we had to update it by CLIA standards, so.
Okay.
While it's a good representation and in context, it's pretty much the same. There's a lot of like
Okay.
specific wording that has to be in there for code purposes.
So for our purposes, is there like a link we can just,
Yeah, if you go to the police department page on the city's website, all of our policies are listed there. It's a big PDF. And you can go through all of those. And I think what Anthony's saying is that gets done in April and December. So
Okay.
from April until now, there have been some policy updates that haven't been updated in that PDF. So the complaint process is one that we've updated since then. So there may be some that are going to be different. So if there's something you're interested in, like a specific policy, let us know and we'll get you the most current version so you can have that. I don't even know how many policies we have. There's a lot of policies. And they deal with things as mundane as, our oath of office is mundane, but it's like, it's scripted, but it's a policy. And then it's complex as like an internal affairs investigation. So they're all over that spectrum. So if you have questions or any of that stuff, just let us know and just shoot one of us an email and we'll get you an answer to it. And again, if you want an updated version of the policy, let us know and get that to you as well.
Jonathan, we'll add the link to that policy document that he's talking about under the key documents on the board.
okay.
Yeah, we can put why don't we do that? We'll just give you send the PDF to you and you can put it there.
Okay, that's great. And to your point, that there's obviously going to be a lot of questions that we'll have of the department. And that will be when we next convene as a work session, we'll get your presentation, that's interactive, intended to be a lot of Q&A. Because you're not going to be putting anything until you feel like you're ready to put it together. So
Is that after the next community meeting?
what's that?
Is that after the next community? Meeting?
Yeah.
Is there,
That'd be August 14th.
so here's my internal concern that I was keeping to myself, but how does this group know the right answer to questions to ask the community to get responses to if we don't have a baseline of what is actually happening now? And so now we're disjointed from where that would be. That's just, I'm looking at it from a community perspective, or even this groups. How do I know what to ask my neighbor if I don't know what's happening now? So that's helping my concern.
I think if there's not a written representation that informs us enough to be able to do the engagement, surely it's written down. We could at least review that at the very first.
Yeah, and also there's some potential options that we have within the IAP2 model as we think about where and how you get to producing recommendations. We could theoretically, after we've done the mapping process, you could theoretically do like a focus group, if you will, where you've created a map and then you invite in some community members just to walk through that and give feedback and then make some adjustments accordingly. So those are some things that you all can be thinking about as you're doing, because the community conversation isn't really designed to go into that level of detail on your community or on your complaint process, because you're not there yet, as a group. So it's not intended to go to that level of detail, but you might find that you want to go in that level of detail, and that can be accomplished at a later time through a focus group, for example. And that's where the approach is more like user experience. If you've ever done any kind of process improvement, it's a user experience design. So we can talk about that at our next work session as well. Okay, any other questions?
Well, I'm just a little unclear on what's happening with what's happening by what time. So Jonathan, you're gonna get all the notes and everything out to folks. They're supposed to get questions back to you, then you're gonna send a draft. And all that's gonna happen before the 31st.
Yes, so
And we're gonna make it into an electronic questionnaire that can be put out prior to the 31st for people to take electronically.
yes.
Okay.
So deadlines, thank you, Casey, just so we're working backwards, so we've got exact dates. So the 31st is the Monday. So we need to be able to, post that agenda on the 27th, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so, that means that I would need to get your draft questions by the 25th. Which means we need to get everything from me by the end of the day on the. Let's see, by the 20th. That work?
We need to get questions to you by the 25th.
Yes,
Do you have a time?
no, just end of the day.
Okay. It will be the end of
My days go long, so. Okay. It's a lot, it's a lot.
And then there won't be a draft after they get questions to you. You'll compile that into what gets posted on the 27th.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, other questions?
Can we get the community, police community survey data, and any dashboards also for, research documents?
Yep.
Yeah.
The what?
The web.
Community survey, we guys do them every couple of years. Yeah. Whatever they're using.
Like our community satisfaction survey, Alex, is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about the?
I just know it's called, when we were talking, called community survey.
The ETC survey.
Okay.
Oh, the ETC survey. Oh, yeah, yeah. If you're not familiar, that's the city's customer satisfaction survey. That's what you're referring to. It goes out with utility.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with the independent survey, but it sounds like we'll
Yeah.
also, do one.
That's the city survey. It's not the police that don't do it. It's the ETC is a company that does the survey portion, and there's a section on the police part of that. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, maybe it's not as valuable as I thought. I'll look into the other surveys that have also been done, and we can decide it as, people can decide if they want to look at those or not. But yeah, just kind of to your questions about like, what are the kind of the complaints that may be received or maybe that aren't being received formally that people would potentially offer based on what process we come up with. So I think that would be good to look at.
Yeah, and once we get the presentation from the PD, I think that's going to be a lot easier to react to. So I appreciate the effort to get that ready for us, and we look forward to doing that on August 15th. Okay, so in the meantime, you're looking at what's currently on the portal. You're going to look at the additional notes that will be discussion notes that will be posted by Thursday. That will include all of the community conversation one notes, all of our discussion notes up to this point, all new resources that we've identified that you'll reference will also be posted there. And we're asking you to start reading through those. And then by July 25th, you're sending to me any draft questions that you think would be good to ask at community conversation 2. And if you aren't sure how to word it or anything like that, if you at least have the gist of it or a phrase or some concepts or something like that, that's enough for me to work on them. So feel free to send that to me. If you have any questions in the meantime, just reach out to me. Just a reminder, we are a public entity, so be mindful of COMA, the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and so everything that we do will be posted in the portal. But we're not doing serial meetings, so just a cautionary note again that don't reply all when you do send emails, because that can trigger what's called a serial meeting, and always interpret broadly anything related to COMA in the spirit of the public has a right to see the workings of government, and all the public have been engaged in. Okay, any other questions, concerns, comments? Covered a lot. Thank you. This is heavy work and this is a pivotal time, as I mentioned at the beginning, turning into some real heavy homework. So thank you for your attention to this on behalf of the process and the community. We've got a lot to deliver on, and I thank you for all the time that you're putting into doing this. Please help yourself to take some food with you as you go, and we will see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.